Alright, hello once again. We're back with another video, and today we're going to do something simple, a little bit of basing. So one of the things that I need to do for my Blackstone Fortress game is, besides getting everything painted, is getting everything based. So I've been working on my Renegade Ogre in here, and it's time to get the base ready. Now we covered this in a previous video for our Poxwalkers, but I kind of skipped over the basing section, so you can see what the end result looks like here on my Poxwalker. I want to get the same look and feel on my Renegade Ogre's base here. So it's already been sanded very smooth using multiple grits of paper, and then it's been primed with black primer, and now we're breaking out the main colors here that we're going to use. I have Army Painter Matte Black, Vallejo Model Color Dark Prussian Blue, Citadel Ahriman Blue, Citadel Blue Horror, and Pro Acryl Titanium White. I'm going to list those out here on the screen, but these are the main colors that we're going to use. And the first thing that we're going to start off with is getting out some of the Dark Prussian Blue and Ahriman Blue to start the lining. And to get started with that, we're going to get out some of the Ahriman Blue. And like I said, I've got Dark Prussian Blue out as well, but mostly Ahriman Blue here for this first step. You can practice this a little bit ahead of time, just kind of sketching it out on paper or even on the base itself with a pencil. But I'm just kind of going in freehand, and I'm just going to start drawing some lines. I'm going to divide up the base into multiple sections with multiple angles. So the first thing I'm going to do is bring in 3 lines, all kind of converging in on a relatively central point here on the base. And that's going to be where I start. And then we're just going to continue to subdivide that. Again, I'm using the Ahriman Blue since that's kind of our midtone, and it shows up well against the black. If things are a little messy, don't worry about it. You can go back and correct this. So if something gets a little bit off center, if it's a little bit too thick or too thin, just go back over it. And if you need to cut down on the line, go back in with some of your matte black or whatever black paint you might be using that matches the base color, and get that just kind of back in order. You can always use the black to kind of straighten up your lines, make them a little bit thinner, etc. Just use it as kind of an eraser at this point. And now you'll see me putting in other lines, breaking up the major areas that I've already broken up. And these just kind of branch off and subdivide those areas a little bit. So let's skip ahead just a smidge. You can kind of see how I'm starting, and let's see what it ends up looking like. You'll notice that I'm bringing in some lighter colors here. I'm starting to mix in a little bit of our blue horror to make certain points of the line lighter, and a little bit of our dark Prussian blue to make parts of our lines a little bit darker. You'll see more of the dark Prussian blue brought in towards the end. Now, how do I know which end to make brighter and which end to make darker? I kind of decide which point I want to look like light is emanating out from underneath, and kind of go from there. So usually where points converge or a point runs into another line, that's where I focus. And then sometimes at the edges a little bit to give it just a little pop around the edge. It's totally up to you and whatever makes it look good, but once you start picking a place for these points to be, we're going to continue enhancing that. Alright, so we're kind of on to the next step already here, and we're actually going to go back and enhance our lines even more as we go. What we've started doing at this point, you might notice that we've got a dark blue, that's our dark Prussian blue, and I'm actually filling in parts of the black areas here. I'm just using pure dark Prussian blue here, and I'm really trying to get a very dark, rich saturation over that black, and this is going to take 2 or 3 layers on each of the panels because we are starting out black and we're mixing down into it. So I'm starting at one area, usually closer to those points where I've decided I want the lines brighter, and I've kind of just blended in to the opposite side of the shape. So you can see me putting blue into one corner of this shape here that I've blocked out, and then just kind of drawing it out towards the other side and blending it out into a bit of that black. If need be, you can blend in a little bit of the matte black that you have earlier. And don't worry too much about hitting the lines. If you hit the line and your paint's thin, you'll still see the line later, and we'll go back and touch those up before we're done. The important part here is to add a lot of blue into these areas, so let's skip ahead a little bit. And you can see the fruits of my labor here. I'm going to be adding a little bit more blue as we go, but this is a really good start. You'll notice it's very subtle here, but this will enhance the overall look at the end of the paint job. Alright, I'm going back in with that liner brush, and now I'm mixing bits of blue horror in with the Ahriman's blue that we started with, as well as mixing a bit of our dark Prussian blue with a little bit of that Ahriman's blue for the darker ends of these lines. So take it very easy here. Make sure you've got a nice thin mix so the paint flows well off of our liner brush, and we're just making real subtle lines here. So this is going to take some time. Make sure you keep a nice tip. Make sure you keep a nice straight stroke. You'll notice that I'm rotating the base, so every time I go in and pull the brush, I've got a relatively straight pull on my line, so position the model relative to how you like to draw your lines. And it's starting to really look like we've got some light emanating underneath these cracks. And this is using mostly just the blue horror right now. You'll notice I'm hitting a couple of the points where they intersect with the edges as well. Just give them a little bit of extra pop. Some of the lines can be highlighted on both ends, so remember to blend back and forth. You can blend along your lines. We're just putting line over line. And then this is the point where we add some white specular highlights to the very points, the very ends of those lines where we want them to really pop the most. One of the things that I'd like to point out is we've taken a little bit of time to make this base. This is a larger base, so if you're doing a smaller base, you probably need to break it up less. And on top of this, it's also a thing that you might want to do in a batch. Normally when I'm making any sort of base, I'm making somewhere between, well, 3, 5, 7, 10, upwards of, I've done batches of 30 plus bases just to get things ready for various games, etc. For Blackstone, there's obviously a lot of figurines, so if you're going in, you might want to gather up all of your bases and start doing these all at the same time. Maybe a little bit daunting, but it kind of saves you on context switching. That's the biggest thing you can do to help when you are batch painting, is just kind of switch up how many steps you're taking on each individual base, and instead of switching out all of your paints or changing what you're doing, you can just knock out all of the things all at once, kind of assembly line it and keep going. It's boring, but hey, it helps, it works. And with this, you're going to want to do a lot of bases. You want everything to look nice and the same, so using the same colors, the same techniques, and you know what, if you do it all at the same time, it usually looks more consistent. Just out of habit and level of skill. Sometimes you'll notice if you do something over a long period of time, like doing a couple of minis or a couple of bases and then waiting a few weeks or a few months between them, your technique might change, and that's okay. You can always go back and kind of touch up old paint jobs or adjust your new paint jobs, but sometimes they just kind of look good enough together or similar enough that it'll work. So don't get too flustered, don't get too frustrated, and just keep practicing. Alright, I'm happy with the base as it is right now. You'll probably want to touch up the rim of the base with a little bit of black, but we're going to take a short detour here. There's an extra bit on this base that comes with the Renegade Ogre that will add to it. There is a small smashed skull on the base. I'm going to get out Scale 75, Fantasy and Game, Bloodfest Crimson, Braineater Azure, and Harvester Flesh to color it in. This gives me a nice, cool skeletal tone, something a little bit less high value than traditional skull tones or bone tones. And we'll be adding a little bit of our titanium white to the Resurrection Flesh near the end to get a little bit of a highlight. But we're also going to use those blues as well, so hold on to those paints that we got out earlier. So the basic idea here is we're going to go in with a heavy application of the Bloodfest Crimson to start with over the entirety of the skull. And then we'll blend in a little bit of our Braineater Azure and get that coated over the top and the ridges along the front of the face part of the skull, and kind of highlight up through the blue as a mid-tone and into the Resurrection Flesh. That Resurrection Flesh will look mostly skeletal by the time we get to it, and we'll mix in a little bit of our titanium white into the Resurrection Flesh to hit the teeth, the nose ridge, the orbitals around the eyes, and the very top of the skull.
I wonder if this is part of Yumi's strategy.
Now this may be a little bit harder to see, but there's little bits of Blackstone along the side of the skull. So I'm hitting those with the blues that we had earlier, dark Prussian blue, Ahriman blue, and a little bit of specular highlight with the blue horror / titanium white. And we start mixing in a little bit of that titanium white with the harvester flesh as well, and hitting the front of the skull. So now that that's done, the skull's looking pretty good. So we've got one more completed base. Now that we've added the skull to it, just popping it in the hole, it just pops in here. Sometimes you might need glue, sometimes not. In this case, we don't. But we've got one more completed base, and that's the important part. And I've got plenty more to do and use this technique on. But let's just take a quick look. I've got a whip project, which is my Renegade Ogre. We'll just pop it in to take a look at what it's looking like overall. And I'm happy with the results. So thank you so much for joining me on this. I enjoy doing these base videos and simple schemes and stuff to help you out and really help me out as well. So I'll see you next time on YouTube. See you on the weekends on Twitch. And until then, have fun painting minis.